start. And let me start with this introduction, that this book that Rabbi Ayelet Cohen wrote has been the foundation stone for everything we've done for our anniversary. We've used this book for the 12 months to do a chapter a month, and of course not the entire chapters. We did little pieces from each chapter, but to kind of go through our story. And this book was really the foundation for our big 50th celebration 2 weeks ago. We used the book to really craft the narration, and we used the book's Rabbi Cohen's use of the How I Got to CBST sections where you saw how we used them. But the book has really been essential to the celebration of our 50th. So I'm thrilled that Rabbi Ayelet Cohen is joining us online. And can we make your box bigger so I could actually see her? That would be great. And we're thrilled also joining us in Zoom. Everybody appreciating my socks. I wore them special for tonight. Since I knew you'd be able to see my socks, I thought I'd wear something a little jazzy. And you know me in fashion. What are you laughing at? Okay, yes. Anyway, and also joining us on Zoom are Marcia Melnick and Susan Meyer, who couldn't come tonight, but they're also in the Zoom room. And we're also essential partners to the building, the creation, and the publishing of the book. So we're going to have a conversation, all of us, in different ways. But I want to start with you, Rabbi Cohen, just to talk about how did you do this book? Like, let's just start with, how did you do this? Did CBSE have a well-organized archive that you consulted? And tell us how you did this book.
Well, first of all, Shabbat Shalom. It's great to see you. I'm sad that I can't be with you in person, but I say I have a lot of good company on the Zoom. And how incredibly moving it has been to me to see the way that you have used the book this year, leading up, throughout this year of the 50th anniversary and at the incredible celebration last week. It was so beautiful to be a part of it. And it's pretty amazing to see it come to life in that way. So, the answer is no, there were not well organized archives. We had at Bethune Street the Ritual Closet, which also had just file box after file box full of various items. Some had been partly organized at various points in various attempts to create some kind of archive. So you might open a box of old newsletters, which was amazing. And that was an incredibly valuable source of information for me as I was doing the research. And we tried to reproduce. There are a lot of images from the newsletter that are in the book, because it was such a way, there was this sense clearly, even in those early days, of wanting to document the history of CBST as it was being founded. There were boxes of photographs. Some were in envelopes, some were not in envelopes. Some had envelopes that something was written on it, but they clearly had been repurposed for something else. So it was a little bit of a treasure hunt every time, and which I know drove Susan and Marcia a little bit crazy, because even as we were moving through the work on the book, I sometimes thought I was done with a chapter, and then I would come upon an envelope with such amazing stuff that I begged to, add a few more things, because we kept finding such treasures in various closets and drawers and unlikely places.
Can you talk a little bit about the archive that's at the center?
So one of the really fun parts of the research was going to the LGBT Center that does have an archive and has an archivist. And I really understood in a whole new way why it's important to have somebody who's in charge and kind of stopping people from opening the file boxes and rooting through them and taking things out and sticking other things in. Makes a really big difference. And we found some amazing things in there as well. And it was fascinating not only to see the way CBST was describing itself, but the way that other organizations were interacting with CBST and talking about CBST. And so we had great fun looking at materials in the archive at the center. I also spent some wonderful time at the New York Public Library looking at their LGBT archive and some of their Jewish archive, finding other things about CBST. It was really, it really felt like a treasure hunt.
How did you decide how to arrange the book? These 12 chapters, how did you decide the
I don't
theme?
think it was me. Marcia and Susan, do you remember? I kind of think it was you.
Maybe.
Marcia and Susan, do you remember how how it was decided that the book would get organized this way?
I
Because
think
it is brilliant.
well, I think it was a team effort, really.
Yeah.
And we moved it around a little bit. We started
Yeah.
a different thing.
We started in a different way. We were thinking about many different ways of organizing it, but it didn't seem feasible to do a straight kind of chronological
Yeah.
history. That seemed
Right.
kind
That was our first effort, was to try just a straight chronology, and it didn't work.
it didn't work, and it
For all
didn't,
different reasons, a straight chronology isn't going to
A
work.
straight anything did not work.
Oh, come
Oh.
on.
we had a straight author, my goodness. A queer author, I don't know. But I think through the research, really, things started to fall into more obvious kind of categories.
Yes.
So that you could tell the story of education at CBST or music at CBST or ritual
Yeah.
through history. Of course, it meant really trying to jam an intense amount of research and history. You know, it was pretty extraordinary, I think, that Ayelet could weave all that research into a brilliant text.
With
And-
pictures,
And the tech and the pictures were whatever we could really
right?
find, you know, for the most part, but we tried.
Marcia and Susan, can you describe your role in the book and kind of what your role was?
Well, it was sort of the career, the business Marcia and I had was to pull pieces together and create books for publishers. So we had a lot of experience taking chaos and putting them in some kind of order, and then putting together a team that would design it, that would print it, that would bind it. And we ended up going, as we had before, we go to China to print it. So
Yeah.
it was really our old business, and we were still engaged in it. So only this is more fun.
It was such a gift to get to meet all of those contacts of yours from that world and see what they brought to the story that we were trying to tell.
They're still good friends. They really are.
Yeah, I think the fun part for us at one point when you had already moved on to your job at JCC. Do you remember that? And we had layouts, and we would put them up on the wall like storyboards, and we would cut things apart and move them around and see, well, no, this goes here. No, maybe we should do this first. And so the process was quite intensive, and I want to say laborious in many ways, but
Yeah.
there was no other way to do it. And Ayelet had never really worked with creating a book before, certainly of this nature.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that you both have such expertise in working on books that also have such strong visual elements,
Yeah.
that made such a difference, and figuring out how important the images were in telling the story and bringing it to life. And so when we had all those pages stuck up on the wall to figure out how do we organize the story and how do we tell it in a way that's possible to follow, but also captures the energy and what the issues were that have been animating the life of CBST all along. And I think that's how we landed on the thematic organization, because for so many people, it's one area or another that brought them in and really made them excited about the life of the community. And so we had to tell it simultaneously, chronologically, and thematically.
Yeah. It was also, well, go ahead, Rabbi. You wanted to ask a question.
Well, I was going to ask another question, so you can finish up, Marcia, with this.
No, I was just thinking about how we highlighted different people. We attempted to, represent the range of membership over time.
Mm.
And that was also a very difficult task, but I love the way at the 50th, we were able to use those statements by some of the key members, the leadership and past presidents and so on. That was so moving because so many of them were talking about why they got involved and how they got involved. It was so
It was
rich.
incredibly moving.
It was really rich.
I have to confess that we looked over the chapter very carefully while we're having breakfast today. And I said, oh, wasn't that move exciting? Wasn't it great getting into 30th Street and, reliving the experience of those days? It just came back to us, not just making the book, but being part of the plot.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the different sections, which, yes, the visuals are amazing, the use of different shapes and shadings, and it's really something to look through the book and just look at the visuals. Brilliantly done, use of newsletters or written text, but taking a picture of it so you see what it looked like then. And then you have these sections, the How I Got to CBST, which are all in blue. And these are all congregants who tell their short stories in a short fashion, and we recorded a bunch of those. And then there are things
and that
in
was really,
yellows.
and that was something that came from Susan and Marcia, was developing a visual vocabulary for each of these themes to do the How I Got to CBST.
So talk a little bit about those the themes
So,
and
I
the
mean,
different.
for the people who are on Zoom, I'll just hold this up.
Yeah.
This is very high tech. But so we would find an old photo, and then we had the idea of doing it. It's a different typeface. It's on the blue background, so that all the way through, and we would, kind of bring people in as they entered, the cast in order of appearance based on, based on when they became involved and what was going on for them. And so that was one of the pieces of that visual vocabulary. Of course, all of the excerpts from the newsletter, and they convey so much. It's not only actually the information, but the way that it looked in the 70s, the way that it looked in the 80s. You can see when it moved from something that was literally cut and pasted to something that was, printed on the dot matrix. And you see how all of that technology evolved. And I was really struck at the celebration of the 50th, hearing, watching the videos of people reading their How I Got to CBSTs, which were often, I recorded the interviews with them in the first place. And even if you think, 10 years ago when we were doing this, the transcription software is not what it is right now. Most of them I just had to keep rewinding and typing out and rewinding again and typing out again. So I was laughing hearing them record again something which we had worked so hard to type out from a recording. But it gave it a whole other layer.
And I was very moved to see at the 50th anniversary party, that enormous party where people were giving their testimonials. Most of them had the book in their laps.
Yeah, it was very moving.
Very moving. Yeah.
So what's the yellow? There are close-ups that are in yellow.
Oh, so the yellow close-ups
Like
were
page 27.
great. We're zooming in on a member. Oh, I just opened to 37. This is Mark Bieber and his tutu.
Oh, God. God love those.
Yeah, so throughout the book, there are these things called close-up where it features, go ahead.
Right. And often these were people who were not available to interview. In both of these cases, Roz Riggleson and Eleanor Lester and Mark Bieber were not alive. We couldn't get there in their own words, how I got to CBST, but we felt like they were so key in terms of telling the story that we wanted to, and this was, we then gathered from other people's accounts, and I actually found some great things about Roz and Eleanor in the New York Public Library, I remember. Again, paired with photos that we found in those envelopes, that could tell a little bit of their story, even when we couldn't do it in their own words, but who were so essential to the formation of the synagogue. Another element that I would, lift up are the in memoriams in the age chapter. And these were all little obits that appeared in the newsletters. And, some months there were so many of them. So I'm looking at, page 76 and 77, if you have the book in front of you. And this was something where we really struggled to figure out the right way to make them look. What I had in my mind was the Pashkavilim. If, in Israel, when someone dies, there's a poster that people put up all over the place.
This is an amazing modern Israeli word, which is, of course, Yiddish, that is used to refer to, it's called pashkvilim, it's a Yiddish word, but every Israeli uses it to mean the posters that get put up to announce somebody's death with a black border, and it will announce the death and the funeral and any information. And they're called pashkvilim, which I just love because it's a Yiddish word, but it's completely Israeli Hebrew now. Go ahead. Sorry, that was a little.
Right. So we tried to do them with the border. It didn't really work out with the border. We did it with gray shading, and the names are in bold. So this is, throughout the age chapter, but there are a lot of them together towards the end of the chapter on page 78 and 79. But they're scattered all the way through.
Yeah.
I yell at and I think it was probably your idea. I don't recall now, but I think it was to have the quote from Isaiah, the double page spread at the end from Yisker at Javits. It closed that chapter out. I just
and in that chapter, we were really trying to capture the enormity and also the escalation. And so if you just page through the chapter, at the beginning, it's, one or two a page, and then it gets a little more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then at the end, there's just so many of them. And that was really, I wasn't around CBST during that time. I know that from all of the stories I've heard, that's what it felt like. And certainly going through those newsletters, just seeing how it was building and building and building and taking over the experience. And so we were trying to accomplish that visually in the way that we were putting that chapter together, and then having that double spread at the end to kind of give a pause of a reflection, to really take a breath, and even within the pages of the book, create a space for mourning and for memory.
I love on page 46, there's a little thing with the old CBST logo. There's this Congregation Beth Simchat Torah with Beit Simchat Torah in Hebrew, with membership numbers broken down by gender from 73 to 79. Like, where you found this, I have no idea. So in my favorite line in the whole thing, though, is the following figures are approximations.
There was something hilarious about it.
1973, there were 40 men and 10 women, total of 50. Now, what defined membership then? That's also a big question.
And there's also in here the membership dues list. I'm trying to remember where that is. Oh, on page 40.
Yeah.
It says over 60 people have signed up for 1975 membership so far. Another 40 would make it more feasible for us to pay the rent in our new place. Annual dues, $18, payable in up to 3 installments. Loved it so much that we had to put it in. It was just so fantastic. It was so of a moment.
And I love that you also have handwritten, both Dick Radvin's handwritten Oneg.
All those cards.
And then the cards on page 41. Yeah, so you've really got this incredible collection. I wish I didn't have time to look for it today, but Jonathan Sarna, the great historian of American Jewish life, maybe the greatest historian of contemporary American Jewish life, wrote a letter about the book, and he said this was the greatest book ever written by a synagogue for its as a book about itself. And he wrote a very, very laudatory to Ayelet for the writing, for the depth. But he said, this is the only book that exists for a synagogue life that's really focused on the congregants, that we really tried to tell the story of congregants. And he said, there is no other synagogue book in the country written by any other synagogue, even the real, that comes close to what we accomplished, what really the three of them accomplished in putting this book together. And it reflects the focus on on congregants and on who the people are that make up CBSE, but also these themes that they brought out. So it wasn't just, there was a rabbi from 1923 to 1947, and then he died. And then there was another rabbi, and then the synagogue broke off, and then there was a fight over the dues. But by doing this thematically, it really goes to what are the core issues that make our synagogue our synagogue. And it's just a really brilliant book. So you should all be super, super proud of even how somebody like Jonathan Sarno looks at this book with he has no bias towards CBSE. We, of course, think it's the greatest book. And some of you remember the reason I wanted this book done is because everybody was writing about CBST, but we were not producing material about us. And I wanted to make sure there would be something in the publishing record that told the story as we would want it to be told.
Yes.
With this, and really, you guys accomplished that.
And obviously that reaction from Dr. Sarner was incredibly moving and quite thrilling. One of the things that he was really taken by was the AIDS chapter, because that's a story that has not been told anywhere else. And it's still something I would love at some point to come back to and really even more deeply kind of tell the story of those lives and imagine what might have happened in our Jewish world if they had survived. Really trying to get the texture of that felt very, very important. I think part of that was because of when I arrived as a Cooper Bergwood Master Rabbinical intern at CBST in the year 2000. And it was, just at the tail end, but it felt so, the losses were so heavy and so fresh. And so much of that first year of my internship was about everyone making sure that we knew the stories of the people who weren't there, including Irving, and making sure that we understood who had made CBST what it was. That was so essential, and it had a huge impact on me. And of course, some of my first pastoral encounters at CBST were around AIDS, even as things were starting to shift. So that felt very important. And I just was so aware of all of the people whose voices we didn't have. I want to say one more visual thing that also we spent a lot of time on, and I hope other people think it was worth it. At the very beginning of the AIDS chapter, we tried to reproduce the aerogram. This is, you remember how much time we spent on this. So this was Michael Levian, who was the first person that we know of who was a CBST member who died of AIDS. And Yehuda Berger brought in this aerogram on that thin blue paper where Michael is describing his symptoms. He's writing to them from Jerusalem, and he is describing his symptoms. And it was such an incredibly visceral piece of history to hold that aerogram in my hand and imagine what it was like for him to be in Israel in 1981 and writing to his friends back in New York. And of course, the letter to Yehuda and Mark Bieber is addressed to CBST. I mean, they're so there. He doesn't even send it to their homes. He sends it to the shul. And it just felt like, how can we reproduce it in a way that feels almost tactile if you're reading it? So I hope we succeeded in some of those pieces, because that's what we were trying to do.
Yeah. And now so many of these wonderful treasures, these historical treasures, are in our bathroom and in our lift we've managed
Oh,
to use
and
recycle all of
Really
our.
good point, that the bathroom downstairs and the elevator.
The wallpaper.
Use,
wallpaper.
I mean, I thought
the
that-
wallpaper is all from the book, so, which we would not have had those images if this book didn't exist. They're all from the book. Yeah, I can't emphasize how chaotic CBSC's historical records are. And that this was produced is just, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And the archives that are at the center are very limited. They're really mostly focused on Irving because he was a founder of both the center and of CBSC. So they took stuff, and we would love to have our stuff where there's a real archivist functioning and taking care of the material for all of these reasons. So are there any favorite things that you love about the book, to all three of you, and any things that you wished you could have included that you weren't able to? Anything?
I mean, I've talked about some of the things I love the most. I think some of the visual elements are just so beautiful and brilliant. You know, here's this piece. It's the Wandering Jews of New York, and it's all the different locations, but it has a map. A map
All the
of
different
city
locations that CBSD held
that CBST
services.
ever
So it
met
really-
from 1973 to 2013. And so, but it's on the background of a map, or in between each chapter, there's you know, a beautiful, in between each section of the book, there are these gorgeous
Spreads.
Page
Yeah.
spread.
pages with these. So I love how beautiful it is. And I love remembering working on it, remembering when we were digging around the archives and sticking things on walls, and when you were pushing me to hurry it up. And it was such a,
Hey, you were having babies, weren't
I
you?
was having a lot of babies. I was a little bit busy, but it was also amazing. And
It really helped that we were so closely connected with the designer and with the production team that we could have kind of simplify the process because we'd done it so many other times with other chaotic books.
Yeah, the designer of this book was somebody that Marcia and Susan worked with on many, many other books, and it's brilliant, just brilliant.
And there are certain things where it feels like we captured a moment. If you look at page 258 and 259, this is about CBST in Israel, and it's both the JNF Forest and an early international conference of gay Jews in Israel, and just the photos are so evocative of the, you know, what's on the poster in these protests.
Yeah.
If you can see that at all online, but we should have made slides. That would have been smart. But I love that we capture that, because even now the stories that we were telling so frequently and repeating so frequently in the early 2000s are not necessarily stories that we're repeating as frequently now. And so to have them preserved feels very precious.
I am very aware of that. That the stories are no longer being told of a certain period, and people's assumption of what CBST is really different than it was then. And that is why it's important to preserve historical records and to write books and articles and things like that. So it's really incredible.
And
Right. It feels like if we were to have started this book now, we might have told different stories.
yeah, right.
For sure. I think your connection, not only to CBSD, but to Israel, your deep connection, really gave more texture and information to the book. I'm just looking at the JNF Forest and things that a lot of people didn't know about in the same way that you did. And you were able to really bring that out, because not everybody in the synagogue was connected in that way.
Right. I mean, one of the things that was so interesting to me was locating the evolution of CBST in terms of what was happening in the North American Jewish community and in the time, and that there were so many pieces that were so important to the founders, because that's what made you a real shul, was to, you know, march in the Salute to Israel Day parade, or to, you know, be involved. And, you know, one of the things that I was really curious about is why in 1973 was it a synagogue and not a chavorah? Why was it so important to have those structures? Because that legitimacy, that sense of authenticity was so important to feel like it was really felt like a show. That was really, um, and I think in terms of some of the pivotal moments, I've been thinking a lot recently about the story that Bill Fern tells about the Yom Kippur War, how he and Irving were planning to come to CBST together for the first time. And then I think Bill was in Europe and Irving said, I
Yes,
couldn't
Bill
wait.
was
I had to
away.
go
Right.
because the Yom Kippur War broke out and Irving had to go. And I've been thinking about that in this last 2 months of that moment that I have heard so much about and really learned a lot about from those conversations with Bill and others about what that moment was in American Jewish life when people felt the need to show up and affiliate and be around other Jews, and hearing stories now from rabbinical students who are working at Hillel, and these kids are showing up who have never been in Jewish spaces before because they want to be around other Jews, and really thinking about that parallel. So, I mean, obviously, when we were doing this, I couldn't have thought ahead to this moment, but it felt like such a snapshot in time of what felt important, and how much having a forest, a JNF forest, which felt so important to be a real.
Hold on a second, just for those who
Oh.
don't know the story, because does everybody know what happened at the JNF Forest? So the World Congress of Gay and Lesbian Jewish Organizations, which was its name at the time, tried to donate money to have a
I
forest.
don't even think.
Oh, you're
I think it
muted.
was just gay, not even gay
Oh,
and lesbian
just gay.
at the time.
Okay, the World Congress of Gay Organizations, right? Just gay?
In
They
1979,
had donated the money, but they wouldn't put up the sign. You were there.
And it was this,
So
and it was
this
this
is the story.
huge,
It became this
many-year
huge gay
battle.
rights issue, and Israel was extremely anti-gay then, so there was a huge fight to get them to actually put up a sign that used the word gay, which is, it's phenomenal how recent that really was in history. But
So
it was a
yeah.
huge fight, and one of the first big public fights in Israel about anything related to
And
gay.
so we have a photo in the book of our people at what's thought to be the very first demonstration for LGBT rights in Tel Aviv in 1979, and it's our people in those photos. So that's amazing. And also to think about how far the conversation has shifted around Israel and the relationship between North American Jews and Israel, that these felt like the most essential fights, is such a moment in time.
Can you say a little bit about interviewing and working with Pinchas? So the first spiritual leader who was a volunteer for the first couple of years, and you interviewed him.
So that was a real honor and a real gift, and really the thanks to that goes to Regina Linder, who had kept maintained that relationship throughout the rest of his life, and I think helped him trust me and us in the process enough to come down to CBST and do that interview. And it really, I'd been hearing about this person since I arrived. It was kind of this mythical figure. And to actually get to sit with him and to talk to him and to feel like he was entrusting me with his stories felt incredibly, incredibly precious. And it wasn't that much later that he died. And I was really honored to be able to be at his funeral. Regina was also there in this, shtibel on the Upper West Side, and to feel like, it to have the honor of being able to hold some of those stories and pass them on felt really, really holy. And even if that part of his life wasn't something he talked about a lot anymore, to know that he was still thinking about it, that he understood how precious it was to share those stories so that we could put them in the book and make sure that they were recorded. I feel incredibly privileged to have been able to do that. And there are a lot of people I sat with to work on the book and to record their stories who are no longer with us. Yehuda Berger and Dick Radvin. And I feel incredibly, incredibly grateful to have had those conversations, to have heard them telling their stories in their own voice, and to be able to include those words in the book.
And we were like your midwives.
You're lucky what?
You gave us such great material to work with. Yeah.
So let's just open it up for some questions because we don't have so much longer, but let's see who has questions to ask the panel who's joined us. Andy? Oh, yeah, you need to use the microphone so that you can face the camera.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. So my question is this. It's 10 years later, and we're now at 50, and there's a lot more happening. I hope our archives are in better shape than they were back then. And, oh, sorry. I wish. Anyhow, is there any thought being given to updating the story, to continuing this? And it doesn't have to be a book. It can be a wonderful website now going forward.
We have started any number of efforts that have not been followed through. The LGBT religious religious
Archives Network.
which is we started that, and there wasn't anybody to kind of. We have a lot of and doing real archive work takes a level of professional involvement. There have been a few people who have started and stopped and started and stopped. And now we live in a digital world. So now you need a level of digital archival knowledge that is really serious to get. So the answer is no, it's a mess. And we have, the only thing good to say is that since so much is now digitalized, it will be findable a little bit easier, but it's a mess. That's the answer to the question. But we would need.
That's connected a little bit to Cheryl's question on the chat, which is how long did it take us to do the book? I think it took us 2 years, or at least 2 years. We started in about December 2010, January 2011, and we thought it was going to take a year, and then we thought it was going to take a year and a half. That's when I started that new job, and then we were still working on it. I would block out these times for secret meetings, and we would hole ourselves up in my office. So I think it was about 2 years. And a year and a half of that was really full time on my part. So it's a huge project. I think it's amazing that so much now is recorded on social media, that the photographs.
But organizing it is a key thing. And it really, honestly, we've had a volunteer committee working on it into different degrees. Honestly, it's another thing you need to hire a professional. It's like one of those things. Volunteers will be very excited for 3 months and then move on because life gets busy. You need somebody who's going to organize the systems, and then maybe volunteers can keep them updated. Maybe. I'm not convinced, because it takes a level as what is being described. To really have a functional archive, you need to keep supervising it so that people don't mess it up in all different ways, you know? But that would be a great thing to put on CVSC's strategic plan for the next one, to really figure out funding for it. Because with a professional, they would whip it into shape. We actually did a proposal. We had somebody who is a professional archivist come in and do a proposal. You know, it's all doable, right? It just takes somebody really knows what they're doing, as opposed to what has happened at ZBSC is everybody comes up with their own new system. Guess what? That does not work. And then they come in, they say, no, I prefer to do it this way. No, let's change it this way. You need somebody to set it up, and we haven't done that.
Right.
But we have a lot of more materials now.
We spent at least the first 6 or 8 months just trying to organize the materials and figure out what was there. That was a huge piece.
5 of those months were probably Annette Miller's boxes. No, I'm teasing. But you know, also technology keeps changing. So that is another challenge that had, for example, this book, 320 pages, we printed it overseas because that was the most affordable way to do it, and to do a full color book. If we had done it in the States, it would have cost twice the amount. It would have been prohibitive, and we would have had to think about other ways to do the book. You know, was it going to, we ended up with 356 pages, which is huge.
Very
Oh, no, or
expensive.
320, something like that. Yeah, 320.
320.
But, today you can do digital books, print on demand. But even a book like this, I guess you could do it. They do it on Blurb and
Right.
other websites.
But I
Right.
agree, as an amateur historian, maintaining archives and records and writing about our history is essential. And maintaining, we also have a lot of audio tapes, some are audio visual. We haven't done anything with organizing them in a really clear way that is also findable, right? You need to organize them and store things, but then do it in a way that you could actually find them when you want them.
Right. And that the technology doesn't immediately become obsolete. I mean, Tasha and I digitized the newsletters onto CDs.
At that time.
At
yeah.
that time.
So there's probably still a box of those CDs somewhere. I don't know if anyone
Probably
has
in our,
anything
we
that
have
can read
a
them.
storage unit in New Jersey. That's what I mean. We don't even know where stuff is, Yes, Rick.
So years ago, I gave Michael Levine boxes of photographs, and I had copies of about 5 loose leaf binders. I think they got destroyed during Hurricane Sandy, but I still have the originals. So I still have 5 loose leaf binders. So if they ever restart up this idea, but again, nothing is digitized, but I still have all of the different newspaper clippings and articles from back then.
I certainly had a lot of your envelopes. That is true, and that was very helpful.
Shep. You have to come up and use this so that you're on the mic.
I was curious. Yeah, did you happen to have contact with Jacob Gubai? I actually met him, but he was in Australia. Did you contact him or no?
He wasn't a huge fan of the current leadership of CBST, if I may say.
Yeah,
He felt that women were taking over the synagogue.
Yeah, he wrote a letter to Ayelet and to me, accusing us of being part of the lesbian takeover of CBST, that this was not he did not found the synagogue for women to be in leadership. Women shouldn't wear talitot or kippot or be.
he mellowed out toward the end. But another thing,
No, this was near the end.
I just want to say, I think JNF eventually apologized to us.
Yes, they did. JNF did definitely apologize. But no, Jacob Gubai was not a fan of women in leadership. But we have a letter that he wrote us, and he accused Ayelet of being he wrote the letter. It's quite special. He wrote it in crayons and
Magic marker.
Magic marker. Every line is a different color, so it's quite colorful. But it's basically blasting me and is for being a lesbian, and blasting Ayelet Cohen for being a lesbian. So he wasn't fond of us or of women.
Oh, boy.
But I will say that with a lot of other members or former members who had gotten disconnected from the synagogue, a lot of our members helped reach out to them. Yehuda Berger did that. Regina did a lot of that. People who had drifted away for various reasons, sometimes with animosity, sometimes not, made a point of reaching out to them wherever they were so we could get their stories. And most responded because they wanted to be in the book and because they wanted the stories told. And I'm very, very grateful for that. We could not have done that without them.
Any other questions? So is there anything that you wish that was in the book that couldn't be in? From space or time, or you didn't have enough materials, or do you feel like
I do feel terrible because we left something out. There was in all those the former intern accounts where people wrote something in, there was one that we lost and it didn't make it in. And I feel every time I see that former intern, I feel terrible. But I mean, there was a lot
Our fault.
whatever. But I mean, there was more we wanted to say. I mean, we knew, as Marcia just said, it's a lot of pages. It was already longer than we thought it was going to be. So we could have kept going, but we needed to rein ourselves in eventually. And it made us, it was, I think, healthy to figure out what really has to be here and what's really telling the story and what's, what's a really valuable thing.
Well, you did a brilliant, brilliant job that will go down as one of the great classics, absolutely. And I completely agree with you, Andy. There should be another one written, and I look forward to seeing it, and whoever else is going to raise the money for it is, it's a really worthy act. And we're Am HaSefer, right? We're people of the book. I know not everybody's writing or reading books these days, but it's very meaningful to have a book. And now we have a book publishing department of CBST, which we didn't have. We have published several books, and we should continue, and I look forward to reading the next 40 years, or what are we going to call, what's the next book going to be called? This was the
I don't
first
know.
40
I think we
years.
could do some fan fiction. There are a lot of possibilities.
Fan fiction, that's a great idea.
The tell-all. We're gonna have a tell-all.
Right. Well, we have joked there, we could also write a shadow book with this, that's an accompanied, that does for each chapter the stories we couldn't tell because, how shall we say, right? So we all have some of those. It would be fun to have a shadow book for each chapter, like the asterisk. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Tomorrow morning services at 10 a.m. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Ayelet Cohen, Marcia Melnick, Susan Meyer. Everybody feel good. Good night, good night.
Shabbat Shalom. Good night.
Shabbat Shalom.
Oh, that was great.